Is it visible?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just quickly refresh you with this last slide. Okay, so basically what I would like to emphasize is, again, for the pump calculation, the main part is of course about the power requirement, okay, or the duty. So again, because for a liquid, volume is not a function of a pressure, it's a non-compressible. So usually you can always start with the power for the reversible as volume. So that would be in, for example, in meter per second. Okay, so I'll just point out the SI unit so you can imagine quite easy. Okay, volume in cubic meter per second times the delta pressure, right? Because we will increase the delta pressure. So from P discharge to P suction. So pressure in SI would be in Pascal, and that would be equal to Newton per square meter, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So, and that will give you basically watt, okay, joule per second or watt. Okay, so that will give you watt or joule per second. So you can double check the conversion. Okay, so if you always want to start with SI just to make it safe, that's all right. So let's say you have a 10 cubic meter per second pump, for example, and then you increase from 1 bar to 10 bar, for example. Okay, so that gives you bar is the power of 5 in SI, right? So the delta pressure itself is 900,000 Pascal. So using this example, you will get a very big pump requirement. Okay, so that close to 9 million, if I calculation is correct, 9 million watt. Okay, or 9 megawatt. Okay, so that's a very big pump. So that's still the reversible part, the ideal part. Okay, so this is a very big pump, cubic meter per second, and then a very big delta pressure, 10 minus 1, for example. That's Pascal or Newton per square meter, and that will give you 9 megawatts. So you can convert it back if you want to make it more relatable to you. What kind of flow rate that you use in your water pump in your home. Okay, so maybe that should be less than 1, and then the delta pressure probably from 1 bar to 3 bar, for example. That's why your pump requirement will be, I think, in the order of 200, 300, or at most 500 watt in your home. Okay, so and then if you want to convert it to irreversible, the actual, okay, maybe you can call it actual, then you just simply have to divide your reversible or your ideal, okay, divided by efficiency. So if the efficiency is 75%, for example, so that would be 9 divided by 0.75 should give you roughly around 12 megawatt. The deviation between the actual and the ideal would be the heat loss to the environment. Okay. Any question about this, about the pump calculation? So just remember that it's as simply as volume times the delta pressure, okay, divided by the efficiency later on. So the other formula, it's just a way to convert the results. Now it's still in watt, but let's say you want to convert it to joule per kilogram, or you want to convert it to meter. So that's not really a problem. You just have to divide by the density and the gravity and so on. Okay. So pump design is it's a multidiscipline. I would say it's a multidiscipline works. Okay, so obviously ChemEng will work in this field because you can imagine that in all of the processing facilities, we are the one who make a decision about the pressure requirement in almost in all of the main equipment. Okay, so we will decide what's the for example, what's the flow rate. Okay, that's our decision. And then we will decide what's the pressure in the suction part. And then we will decide at least the pressure in the discharge part. That's our decision. That's a chemical engineer decision. Okay, but as I mentioned before, at least mechanical engineering will have a very big role in designing a pump as well. Okay, so mechanical engineering will have a big role in designing a pump. Okay, so if we have the flow, we have the pressure. Based on calculate formula in the previous slide, it's very easy to calculate the power requirement. Okay, that's still part of the chemical engineer's job. That's the main part of the chemical engineer's job in the pump operation and design. Okay, but for a mechanical engineering, they will not really focus on this flow rate, pressure differential, and so on. Rather, they will focus on the detailed dimension of the pump. Okay, detailed dimension of a pump. That will be more of a responsibility of a mechanical engineer. Okay, detailed dimension. That will be we just need to know a little bit, okay, but not in much detail. Okay, so when we're talking, let's say, about centrifugal pump later, okay, let's say we want to work with centrifugal pump. So that's the centrifugal pump. It involves a lot of blade, okay, impeller that will rotate, okay, that will rotate to increase the pressure of the pump. The size of the impeller and then the angle of the impeller, that's really more of a focus of the mechanical engineering. Okay, but at least we need to know the main type of the pump. Okay, so that we can select the correct pump for our application. So when we design pump in a very detailed condition, there are a lot of code and standards that are to be accepted internationally. Okay, so when we say that we want a pump, a centrifugal pump for generic refinery service, okay, a petroleum pump, and it's already designed using, for example, API 610, it's accepted everywhere in the world. Whether you want to install it in Indonesia, whether you want to install it in Middle East or in China or in Europe or in the US, it will be accepted. But the rules will be very guided about the connection, about the main consideration in designing a pump. Again, this is just an introduction for you to be aware with this kind of standard that is used internationally by professional engineer. Okay, but there are a lot of standards that can be used. Okay, so when we talk about API, again, the abbreviation would be American Petroleum Institute. Okay, so mainly it was developed in the US, and mainly it was developed to handle petroleum pump. The thing about the petroleum pump is it's usually well made, it's usually very reliable, but of course the consequence is it's relatively expensive compared to the other of a generic pump that you can buy using another standard. Okay, so another typical standard that is used is ANSI. Okay, again, it's just introduction for you. ANSI, it's not really specific for petroleum. Okay, so a lot of water pump, chemical pump will be designed using the ANSI for different kind of pump. Okay, so you want to use ANSI, for example, but you want to use a centrifugal pump, then you use the ANSI B733.1. Okay, but later you want to use the vertical turbine pump, which is submersible and reciprocating, almost like a piston. instead of 73.1, now the ANSI should be the E101.88. So again, we will not talk in detail about this. It's just an introduction for you. Same thing with the API. The generic one is API 610, and then when you want to use reciprocating like a piston pump, then you should use the API 674 and so on. The API itself sometimes is very loaded, one document itself could be like sometimes it's more than 100 pages. A lot of details about the maintenance, about the production, manufacturing production. A lot of details that are used by the professional engineers. Okay? But again, it's only for a bachelor degree or undergrad, so it's just an introduction for you. Will be the type of pumps that are used in the chemical industries. First one, hopefully you're already aware with the name itself, should be self-described. It's a centrifugal pump. So that means it involves an impeller that rotates, and the energy from the impeller will be converted into the kinetic energy of the fluid. Okay, so why it's very popular? It's the most popular, I would say. It's the most popular pump. Why? Because it's relatively cheap, it's easy to be maintained, and relatively small in size, and available in a lot of different capacity. Okay, so it tends to have achieve a higher head. That means you can increase to a very high pressure, discharge pressure. It's doable using a centrifugal pump. Okay, and then I will explain a little bit later about this one, and I would say this is one of the main advantage of the centrifugal pump. Okay, one of the main advantage is you can operate at constant head and varying capacity. Okay, what does that mean? Usually later we will have something that is called as a pump curve. It explains about the minimum and the maximum range of operation that can be handled by one particular centrifugal pump. Okay, so maybe it will look like something like this. Usually it looks like a curve. Okay, and usually that's the head, and the x-axis is usually the flow rate. Okay, so this is the typical characteristic of a centrifugal pump. It can be used in a varying capacity. That means we have quite a wide range of operation. Okay, so we can say that this is our minimum flow, and that will be our maximum flow. Okay, so as long as we're working somewhere in the middle of this region, it can be handled using one pump. And that's very attractive for a chemical process where the process cannot be steady at all time. Sometimes a variation incoming from the feed or some disruption from the process. So engineers doesn't panic a lot, because we know what's the minimum range and what's the maximum range that can be handled using the same pump. Okay, so that's one a very good advantage of using a centrifugal pump. Or even we can manipulate the RPM. Okay, so you can see over here, that's the rotation per minute of the impeller. Let's say that's working with the low RPM. Okay, let's say that's we want to work with the low RPM, and then when we buy the expensive pump, that's has a lot of features. Okay, they supply you with a setting to operate with a different speed at the impeller. Okay, let's say now they will allow you to work at the high RPM. So during some very specific requirement, when we need more pressure differential than the normal one, we can simply increase the RPM of the impeller, and then it will allow us to get into a high differential. Okay, a higher head means a higher pressure differential. So again, it's very flexible. That's a good word to put it. The advantage of a centrifugal pump. We have a range of the flow rate, and we could also play around with the range of the head generated by changing the RPM of the centrifugal. So yeah, and that cannot be done in the positive displacement pump. Okay, it's very hard to achieve those flexibility using a positive displacement pump. Okay, so it's operated at constant capacity. Okay, so that means when we must operate with a PD pump, positive displacement pump. So probably we're working something like almost like a line. Okay, almost like a line. So the minimum and the maximum is very narrow. Okay, that's the minimum flow rate and that's the maximum flow rate. Okay, so please compare it, the PD pump and the centrifugal pump like this. Okay, because because the volume of the piston is already fixed. Maybe that's a nice way to put it. So later when I show you about the volume of the piston, okay, so that's the piston, and sometimes it's expanding, and then sometimes it will be compressing, moving into the right direction. Okay, but the body of the pump itself is already fixed. That's why the capacity of a PD pump is actually not very wide. Okay, so but it's suitable for a service that requires a high-end varying head. Okay, so again you can see that the curve would be very steep, but it's so the maximum head and the minimum head can be adjusted. So it's doable when our process suits this characteristic. It's possible for us to buy a PD pump instead of a centrifugal pump. Okay. So when you can make sure as an engineer that okay, I'm gonna design it in a way that my flow rate can be maintained at a constant capacity, such as an injection, probably injection pump. It's possible for us to use a PD pump, a reciprocating or a rotary pump. Okay. So I will continue my explanation first before open the question. Okay. So now this should explain to you about the principles of a centrifugal pump. Okay, so liquid will be sucked at the suction point, obviously at low pressure. Okay, obviously at low pressure. That's why it's called suction point. So that's a low pressure, and then it will send the liquid into a radial direction. Okay, and the impeller will rotate all the time. Okay, so that's our impeller, and let's say, I think from the picture it will rotate counterclockwise. So it's a 3D projection. It's a 2D projection where it's actually a 3D unit. So you can, one way you can imagine it is the flow coming from in front of your computer screen. Okay, and then it will rotate. It will rotate, and so let's change the color. Okay, so from those points, then the water will get an increase of energy. Okay, from the rotation of the impeller. So that's the low pressure. That's the P suction. The low pressure, and because of the energy transferred, so the impeller move. That means they have a kinetic energy. That means some of the kinetic energy from the impeller can be converted into the kinetic energy of the fluid, and then later the kinetic energy of the fluid can be converted into pressure. That's the energy conversion in the pump. Okay, so now when it exits the pump, we can achieve the high pressure at the discharge point of the pump. Okay. So some of the main components of a centrifugal pump is, of course, the liquid nozzle itself, and then the impeller, the size of the impeller, the shape of the impeller. We just need to know about it. But again, the mechanical engineer will be the one who will, in detail, designing those kind of decision. Okay, they will design it in a way that it can achieve the target that is given by chemical engineer. We want the pressure to be 1 bar to 10 bar. Okay, they will think how much impeller, how big the impeller needs to be done, needs to be produced, and needs to be used. Okay, so again, this is the GIF illustration for the centrifugal pump. It will suck. Okay, why it's called a suction? Because it will literally suck the water into the pump. Okay, it almost causing like a vacuum condition. Okay, it almost like causing a vacuum condition. Because of the vacuum condition, because of the rotation of the impeller, now the impeller point will be at the very low end of the pressure, almost like a vacuum effect. So the liquid from the feed can be sucked into the system. Okay, and then again it will rotate. So yep, it will rotate and it will be sent to the discharge. Okay, so this is like a one-stage impeller system. So in this illustration, it's like a single stage, one-stage impeller system. But depending on our needs, of course, it can be designed in more advanced way. Okay. We can play around with the shape of the impeller. Of course, this will be decided by the fluid characteristic. Okay, by the fluid characteristic, whether it contains corrosive. It will affect the material selection. Okay, if it's not corrosive, then I can use a carbon steel. If it's a very corrosive fit, then I have to use a exotic alloy, like a stainless steel or any other more expensive metal. Okay, it also depending on the solid fraction, of course, solid fraction of the solid content of the fit. Okay, if it's free of solid, then we can simply use the cheapest type of impeller. Maybe that is the one that is the most easily produced. Okay, almost like a disc, a circle. But maybe later when we're working with something with a slurry pump or containing some solid, it has to be adjusted to prevent any erosion or abrasion into the pump. Okay, because you can imagine that if a solid goes directly into this kind of impeller, then coming at a high velocity, so a lot of solid will goes at high velocity into this pump, and it will cause erosion or abrasion, and your impeller will degrade quite fast. Okay, so when we want to achieve a very high pressure differential, okay, now we can work using a multi-stage centrifugal pump. So that's like a first stage, and then that's the second stage, and then that's the third stage, and then that's the fourth stage. And usually, finally, we will have something called as a diffuser, which is used to convert kinetic energy into a pressure. Okay, kinetic energy into pressure, kinetic into pressure, high pressure. Okay. So that's some of the main parts, I would say, about the pump. Okay, please be aware where your feed coming from. Okay, and then that's your impeller, that's your stage of impeller, and then usually it will have a diffuser to finally convert the high velocity into a pressure, and then you have your nozzle, outlet nozzle. Okay. Any questions so far before I continue to the example of centrifugal pump curve, or it's understood? Okay, I will continue my explanation. So this is an example of centrifugal pump curve. Okay, let's say you have a feed coming at 100 cubic meter per hour. Okay. Another question is how much pressure differential can be generated from one specific pump. Okay, so pump is not really a customized pump. Okay, so there are not a lot of customized pump. What you will actually get is you go into the market, you go into the licensors, and then ask them what's the typical series that they have that they sell to the market. Okay, so yep, that's the condition. So let's say for one specific pump given by the licensors, they give you a very specific pump curve. So this pump curve will be very specific to one series of a pump. Okay, one series or one type of a pump. When we buy another type of pump, of course the curve will be not identical with this one. Okay, so when you're working in any chemical plant and then you get your pump curve or your data sheet, you have to use the information to know about the estimated or the predicted performance of the curve or the predictive performance of the pump. Okay, so let's say they give you option with 4 impeller diameter option. The lowest one from 216 millimeter impeller diameter, the biggest one to 292 millimeter of impeller. Okay, so it's our option again. What kind of pressure differential will be required in your plan? Okay, so I will give you two example over here. If let's say you just need around 60 meter of head, then you can simply buy the smallest impeller diameter. Okay, but if you need something close to 150 meter at the same capacity, at the same 100 cubic meter per hour, then it will provide you 150 head of pump generated. Okay, so if it's water, then you can calculate the delta P generated. Okay, delta P that will be roughly equal to rho G and H, right? So the head is the meter. So water, then it's close to 1000 kilogram per cubic meter times 9.8 times 60 meter, for example, for the low impeller. So maybe it will be close to 600,000. Is it correct? Roughly 600,000 Pascal. Roughly, okay? And 600 Pascal is roughly around 6 bar. Okay. Using the same principle, now use this formula for the high impeller one. Now instead of 60 meter head differential, now you get 150. Okay, so the delta P generated will be roughly close to 15 bar, right? So if you insert the water at atmospheric pressure, it will exit the pump at 16 bar using this specific. Okay, when you don't need that much of a head or that much of a pressure differential, then buy another pump. Okay, buy another pump that have a different pump curve, maybe something around this region. Okay, at lower capacity or at lower head, that will give you smaller pressure differential based on your needs. Okay, so how can I decide the pressure differential needed for my application? So the question can be answered using the principle that is explained by Pawawan in the previous section. If you need to transfer from point A to point B that have a pressure drop of 5 bar and then delta elevation of certain meter, that's your pump requirement. So that's the source that you can get what kind of total head required by your pump. Okay, and then match it with the pump curve. Okay, actually it's doable using this pump. But if it doesn't fit, then okay, this is not the correct pump for my application. I have to find maybe a bigger or even a smaller pump. Okay. And it's a multi-dimensional curve that is very common to be found in chemical engineering. Okay, so it's not three-dimensional. It's like a four-dimensional. So we have a multi-series of efficiency. Okay, we have a multi-series of efficiency. So let's remain with our two condition. What if I still want to use a low RPM? Low impeller diameter at 100 cubic meter per hour. Okay, and then what if I want to work at a high impeller? Okay, what's my efficiency? And the efficiency is represented by this curve. Okay, that's the ISO efficiency. Okay, that means if I want to work at a high impeller diameter at 100 cubic meter per hour, I can achieve efficiency of 76%. Okay, that means if my calculated power from the VDP, integral VDP, let's say it's, what's the easy way? 3/2, 10. Okay, let's say if my reversible, if my reversible is 10 megawatt, for example, very big pump, then my irreversible or the actual pump power required will be 10.67 divided by 0.67. So you have actually to provide close to 15 megawatt from your electricity because of this 67% efficiency. Okay? But if you want to work at a low diameter impeller, now you have to extrapolate a little bit. Okay, so that's my 67, that's my 60, that's my 55, probably if we extend. So it should be quite close to efficiency of 55%. Okay, so now you're working at a lower capacity, lower efficiency of a pump. That means it will be a relatively bigger loss to the heat loss to the environment. Okay. So a lot of information can be taken from this one centrifugal curve. And later, again, I will emphasize it in a later slide. But using the same pump curve, I get another information about the NPSH. This is the point to prevent cavitation. Okay, it's to prevent cavitation, to prevent any damage into your pump. Okay, so again, the same x-axis because you're still working with the same capacity, and then go to this one. Okay, so that tells you that you have available NPSH of 3 meter. Okay. This is the reference point when we go into the NPSH calculation, where you want to draw the line. You cannot work below this number, or otherwise it will very prone to vaporization and cavitation. Okay, any question? I will stop the explanation first because this is a very important. One of the main important part of the pump calculation is to understand the pump curve, and then NPSH, and later the energy equation. Any questions? Okay, maybe if you don't have any question, then it's my turn to ask you, okay? Just to make sure that you understand how to read the pump curve. Let's say now the flow rate is using the curve, using the same curve, let's say 80 cubic meter per hour. And then using the 1.3 millimeter impeller, okay? So that's the information that I give to you. That's your controlled flow rate at 80 now instead of 100. And what you have in your plan is actually 241.3 millimeter of impeller. If that's the condition that you're working, what will be the head generated and what will be the efficiency of your pump? Anyone ready to answer?
Sir, may I try?
Yeah, sure.
Is the efficiency at 60% and the head is around 120-ish? Maybe 110? Somewhere around there?
Okay, so we have the 80, right? So let me change the line. So that's our reference flow rate point. And what's the intersection of the impeller size? 241.3, right? So we should match it with the intersection of this one. Okay. So what's the efficiency and what's the head generation?
So I think the head is around 90 meters, right?
Okay.
And the efficiency is somewhere around 61, I guess.
Okay, so that's your head. Okay, you simply have to draw the horizontal line to the y-axis. So that will give you roughly around 90 meter. Okay, 90 meter, that means pressure differential for water will be roughly 9 bar. So if you put it 1 bar, then it will exit at 10 bar. Okay. Efficiency, okay, so just make an imaginary line, okay, to extrapolate. So it should be 62.5 or 63-ish efficiency, right? So somewhere around that region. So now if you work in this condition, then using the same pump, then your efficiency will be around 60, let's round it as 62 something, okay? Maybe just round it as 62%. Okay, any questions?
Sir, how do you get the NPSH again?
Well, now if it's at 80 cubic meter per hour, then you just have to go to the vertical line, the green line, and then same thing, horizontal line to the secondary y-axis. So it will still give you roughly around 3 meter. Okay, I will explain later how can you use this NPSH condition. Okay, now the important thing is to get the number from the curve.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? So it can be used in a lot of different way. Okay, what I ask you, last thing that I ask you, it's not really about design, because I give you the selected impeller, and then I give you your capacity, and then I ask you what would be the performance. Sometimes the calculation will be in the reverse direction. Okay, so what you initially have is the efficiency. What you initially have is the capacity, your flow rate, and your head requirement based on the pressure drop calculation. Based on the pressure drop calculation. Okay, sometimes a lot of time it will be calculated that way. Okay, so okay, I know that my pressure differential will be around 125, let's say. So now, I'll give you my last example before I move on into the next slide. So based on the calculation, I know that my delta H, okay, not P, delta H will be 125 meter. Why I know that this number? Because I know that from my pressure drop calculation, I need to transfer oil very long pipeline. Let's say from Padalarang to Bandung, from Pertamina Depot to inner city of Bandung, or maybe if you live in Jakarta, from Pelumpang close to Tanjung Priok, and then you have to send it to Jakarta Selatan, for example, or Depok. Okay, very long pipeline using a pump. So let's say you already calculate that to provide 12.5 bar from the straight pipeline calculation. That means I have to provide 125 meter. And then let's say the flow rate now is given to be, what would be the easy way here? Let's try another number. Okay, 60 cubic meter. Okay, 60 cubic meter per hour. Let's say at that time you just need to transfer gasoline or diesel 60 cubic meter per hour. Okay, so where will your operating condition, if what you know is 60 cubic meter per hour? Hold on, let me check to make sure that, okay, I will change my mind to give you a more straightforward answer. Okay, I think somewhere in this region. Okay, I changed my mind. Okay, so that you don't really have a lot to extrapolate. Instead of 60, let's say you have to transfer 85 cubic meter per hour of gasoline or diesel. Okay, you know your head requirement is 12.5 meter, and then you know that your flow rate capacity is 85 cubic meter per hour. Is it doable to transfer this oil using this pump? And to be specific, now the head and the flow rate is already known. So the question now is, what's the impeller, and then what's the efficiency? Okay, last question before I move on. Anyone want to guess? So where should I put this 85 cubic meter per hour? Vertical line, horizontal line, or anywhere else?
Vertical, sir.
Okay, that's 80, right? So that's 100, that's 90, that's 85. So somewhere around that region. Sorry. Okay, somewhere around that region. That's my 85. Okay, now where should you put your head? 1 to 5 meter. Head is obviously in the y direction. So 1 to 5 will be somewhere in this part. Okay, so I already give you the illustration. Now, what is my selected impeller, and what would be your efficiency?
Sir, is the impeller the 266.7 millimeter, and the efficiency would be 65. 65.
Yeah, correct. So your impeller should be the second to largest option, the 260 something, and your efficiency would be those intersection, the 65. Okay. So again, very important to be able to read this curve in a lot of different way, depending on the data available and the question being asked. Okay, I will move on if you don't have any other question. So PD pump, some of the common one is a rotary pump and reciprocating pump. Okay. So rotary pump, that means they will have some it's called rotary because there will be some parts that rotates gears, in terms of gears that will rotate, that makes the kinetic energy increase. Or if it's a reciprocate, that means it's like a piston movement. Okay, so yeah. For a rotary pump, again, that's the gear. That's what called as a gear. And then the gear could move in a different direction. One of them could be clockwise, and one of them could be counterclockwise. Okay, or it could be as a screw. Okay, again, sometimes it moves in a different direction. Okay, but the common theme here is they will have two gears, either as a lobe, either as a screw, or either as a vane, or even as a gear itself. And again, this is the gear that rotates at a different direction. Okay, and the kinetic energy still will be transferred from the gear into the liquid, and then later converted into the pressure. Okay. For a reciprocating pump, okay, for the video, I think it's okay. I will skip this part. So you can imagine it's like a, what's the correct word here? Almost like an intermittent process. So there will be two parts of reciprocating pump. Okay, so the first step is when you, okay, this is the first part, when the piston move into the left direction in this picture. Okay, when the piston move into the left direction in this picture, the water is drawn into the chamber. Okay, because it moves that way. Now it can be filled by volume. It can be filled by a water volume. Okay, that's the suction part. Okay, that's the suction part. Water is being sucked into the chamber of the piston, and then after the chamber is filled by water, now it moves to the different way. Okay, when the piston move in a different way, now it will push the water outside of the pump. But of course, because it pushed the water, it compressed. Okay, it compressed because the volume become decreased, and because it's compressed now, the smaller volume will be compensated by the higher pressure of the pump. Okay, so the higher pressure of the pump is caused because the volume available in the chamber now becomes less and less. So that's one cycle of a reciprocating pump. So example of a PD pump curve, as I already mentioned to you before, it's not very wide. It's very, very narrow. Why? Because you can imagine again, the size of the chamber is very, very fixed. Okay, so there is not a lot of way to manipulate the amount of volume that can be sucked and then transferred from the system. Okay, so if I give you this example that the rated flow rate is 100%, almost like 100% in the blue line. So 100% will almost be equivalent to the volume of this particular piston chamber. Okay, so and then also depending on the time the cycle time between suction, discharge, and so on. Okay. When you want to work with a different capacity, you either have to change the chamber size or you either have to change the time setting. Okay, you have to change the time setting. Let's say previously it sucked for every 2 seconds and then it will compress for every 2 seconds. Now you have to change the setting to a different second, but that causes a lot of different performance. That's why it's very limited. Okay, when you change the cycle time 2 seconds, let's say to 5 seconds, maybe the pressure generated will be different, but the volume will still be the amount that can be gathered in one chamber. Okay, so that's why the performance looks like this. Okay. Okay, any question about the PD pump? So for a PD pump, there will not be a lot of question about a pump curve. You either buy the correct pump or you either buy the wrong pump. Okay, if you buy the correct pump, then that should be your rated flow rate. Okay, but if you buy the wrong pump and then you actually work in somewhere around this region, it will not work. Okay, because you will not find the blue curve anywhere around this capacity. Okay, so yep, that's the disadvantage of buying a PD pump. Okay, so in terms of the conclusion for the selection criteria, of course, you need to determine the size of the pump. What is the head that must be achieved or generated? And then the physical, chemical properties of the fluid, whether it's a viscous or a corrosive. Okay, if it's viscous, then it will affect the energy loss and it affects the power needed. If it's corrosive, then it will affect the material, steel or any packing material. Packing material means the connection, the fitting, the nozzle, a lot of small parts of the pipeline. Okay. Okay, and then source of power available. Maybe that's like, can you simply use an electricity that is available in your home? That means in your home that will be one phase, 220 volt. That's the common voltage in your home. Or sometimes for a very big pump, you use the 3-phase. Okay, 3-phase 380 volt, for example, or for even bigger pump, such as found in maybe in power generation sector, maybe it's gonna be 3-phase at medium or high voltage, more than 1500, I think, volt. Okay, depending on the efficiency of your pump. So, and your power available. So that's kind of the details that will have to be answered by chemical engineers. Okay, you need to provide me an electricity at this condition so that my pump will be able to work. Okay, so yeah, efficiency of the pump and the spare pump required. Okay, so efficiency, I already give you the example. Usually that comes from a pump curve. And then in terms of the spare pump, it depends on the operation, whether it's continuous or discontinuous. I think I mentioned about it before. Okay, some of common, I would say, arrangement for a steady or continuous pump Maybe you will have something like this. Why? Because you want to have a spare to as a backup during failure time, but your other part of operation still works. Okay, or it could even be divided by 3. Okay, it's a very detailed selection to give you a heads up about the job done by the chemical engineers in designing a pump configuration. Okay, so some of a common keyword, maybe you have something like 2 times 100% of a pump. And then here you have 3%. What does this mean? This means you have one pump at 100% capacity as operation, and then you have 1 times 100% as a spare. So when pump A break down, pump B will act as a spare. Okay, that's a common configuration for a continuous or steady state operation. The other typical example is 3 times 50%. That means now you have 2 times 50% as your operation, and then you have one spare, one at 50% as your spare. Okay, that means, let's say in normal times you have A, B, C pump, right? A and B works almost all the time. When break down, then you use B and C, and then A is fixed by the technician. A is running normal again. Now B break down, then you work with A and C. Okay. 50% means that's working 50% of the maximum capacity required by all requirement. Okay, so 100% at the beginning and 100% at the end. So that's 100% over here, and that's 100% over here. That's for a steady state operation. Okay, but for discontinuous or for a batch pump, maybe you don't really need this kind of extra equipment because that's extra cost. Okay, so maybe for it's most of the time acceptable to only have one pump without backup. So that can be called 1 times 100% without spare. Okay, why? Let's say you only need to work batch for every 1 hour per day, and when it's broken, you have 23 hours to fix the pump or to replace the pump before it will be needed again to run in the next batch. Okay, so that's some of the example. Okay, any question? Okay, I will continue. Okay, so for pump selection, this is coming from the GPSA book. Okay, this is like a guideline provided to you to select different type of pump. Okay, because when you design a new pump, what you initially know is your flow rate and what is your head. That is the most common to information that you have at the initial design of your pump. Okay, and then you get offered by, let's say, 10 pump provider or 10 pump licensor, and then you're confused which one should you choose. Okay, this is a guideline. Just match with this pump. Just use this mapping to help you with the typical correct type of pump. Okay, so let's say you're working with a very small. You're working with a very small capacity, less than 1 cubic per meter. There is not a lot of option for low capacity pump. So regardless of your head requirement, you are likely to be working with a metering pump. Okay, metering pump is like a aquarium pump. If you have aquarium in your house, it's like a metering pump or a chemical dosing pump in a lab. Probably that's very similar to diaphragm and plunger pump. Okay, not a lot of option for those very specific small flow rate. Okay, and then now you're working at a more common flow rate in a chemical industry. Okay, usually at this kind of flow rate, metering pump is not really available and cheap anymore. This is the place where most of your needs can be supplied using a centrifugal pump. Okay, so centrifugal stage would be enough if your pressure differential will be between 0 to 1000, right? Because that's the boundary between the single stage and the multi-stage. So if you're working between 0 to 1000 bar, 1000 meter, which is very big, okay? Let's imagine 1000 meter means 100 bar, okay? That's close to 100 bar. That's, yeah, it should explain to you why we chemical engineer love pumps very much compared to compressor, okay? It's able to compress water from 1 bar to 100 bar using one stage. It's available, okay? From 1 to 100, it can be done using a single stage centrifugal. Okay. Usually that's doable and usually that's the most efficient one. But now let's say you were working with a very high condition, still the same flow rate, but now you need to compress more than 100 bar. Okay. So you are now in multi-stage. So that will correlate to around 100 to 500 bar. Okay, maybe it's not enough to use one stage of impeller. Instead, you have to use 2 or even 3 stage of impeller. Okay. So, for example, this is, I think, CO2 injection pump in a lot of CO2 EOR and CCS project. It is somewhere around this 300 bar, 200 bar. It's up of very specific field to okay, that's for EOR, enhanced oil recovery, or maybe for CCS purpose, carbon capture and storage, to inject CO2 from the gas from the atmosphere to reduce the CO2 emission. It can be injected at very high pressure. Okay, so using some centrifugals multi-stage, it's doable. Okay, but for a very big capacity now, let's say now we're working at more than 1000 cubic meter per hour. Okay, the centrifugal is not really available anymore. Okay, so now you have to use the PD pump, axial flow, for example, or a gear pump. Okay, this is the region for the gear pump. So that's some of the quick guideline to choose the correct type of pump. Okay, for high capacity and high pressure, we are somewhere around this region. Okay, multi-cylinder plunger pump. Okay, so yep. Yeah, it's the same story. I think you just have to different sources, but same story. Check what is your capacity, check what is your head, and then match it into the map, and then what's the correct type of pump to be used. Pump composite curve, again, same. Now we already decide the type of pump. Let's say we want to buy from this particular type of pump. But you need to know the exact series, because again, it's not a customized pump. You buy what is available in the market. When you want to make a customized pump, it's gonna be very, very expensive, and it's gonna be very, very long to wait the pump to be manufactured. Okay, you buy what is available. So yep. Before I continue with the calculations. Okay, I'll continue. Okay, so when we combine the power calculation of the pump with the energy, okay, maybe I'll start with without pump system. Okay, energy equation without pump. So you usually initially what you have is what is your P1. Okay, if if the picture look like this, it should give you a very straightforward information that P1 is 1 ATM. Why? Because the tank is open. Okay. Okay, now I will modify the picture that it's close, okay, so that it's close to atmosphere. Okay, let's say you have your as 5 bar, for example. That tells you about the pressure differential required to increase from 1 bar to 5 bar. Okay, the velocity U1 and U2, that will be the same if and on the diameter is the same at same diameter, pipeline diameter. If it enters
Sir,
at 1
sorry.
inch and it will exit at 1 inch.
Sir, sorry.
Yeah.
Sir,
Go ahead.
I can't see. I can't seem to see your writing.
How the others? Can you see that I draw a circle in the 1 ATM part?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, maybe my connection is unstable. So what's the last writing that you can see in the picture in the slide? Is it already slide 21 or?
I think we're still on slide 20, sir.
Okay. Let me stop presenting. Okay. Is it visible now? Slide 2? Can you confirm that you can see slide 21? What's the Can someone please confirm what's the
We can't
Sir,
seem to
we
see it, sir.
cannot see. Yes, and you're lagging a bit, sir.
Sorry? Okay. Give me 1 minute. So from yes. Let me try again. Okay, is it better now? Can you see slide 21?
Yes, sir.
And then I write some scribble at the top left. Okay, let me
Yes, sir.
continue. Yep. Yeah, the problem is in my Wi-Fi, so okay. Let me re-explain again. This is like the most basic PUM calculation in exam. Okay, so please be focused on this part. You have to know where to put the PUM in the energy equation. Okay, so we'll start with the energy equation without PUM. Okay, it's a Bernoulli equation. You have the pressure, you have the velocity, you have the elevation, right? And then you have the friction. That's the friction. So again, the function of a pump is very straightforward. It is to compensate the friction plus the pressure differential plus the delta elevation. Okay, so later on, you will have to put the pump work as a negative at the right side of the equation. Okay, so that when you later put it in the left direction, then it becomes work of the pump becoming something like involving delta pressure P2 minus P1, and then plus something containing the delta velocity V2 minus V1, and then something containing the delta elevation Z2 minus Z1 plus the friction. So if you need pressure increase, it's the objective of the pump. If you need to increase the velocity, it can be compensated by the pump. If you need to increase the elevation, it is part of the job of the pump. And the friction loss along the pipeline, that is the job of the pump itself, to compensate the energy, right? To compensate the pressure drop. So that's the location of the equation of the energy. So now you just need to be aware and work quite fast to use the information provided. Okay, so let's say you want to transfer from point 1 to point 2. So for P1, previously I stated that, let's say it's 1 ATM, okay, because it's open. So that's obviously 1 ATM or 1 bar because it's open. Now the tank 2, it's still open. Okay, so if the picture looks exactly like this, it's still P2 is 1 ATM. Okay, if the picture look exactly like this, but later if in the exam or in the book you found that the other tank is closed, it could be a pressurized tank. Okay, so if it's closed, it could be a pressurized tank. And if it is a pressurized tank, then P2 has to be given in the example. Let's say now I want to compress the water into 10 ATM or 10 bar, then this number has to be provided for a closed system. Okay, so that will give the number can be put it in the P2. The 1 ATM can be put as the P1. Okay, now how about the velocity U1 and U2 or V1 and V2? That can be disregarded. U1 will be exactly the same with U2, only at same pipe diameter. Okay, if you know that it enters at 1 inch and it exits at 1 inch, it's a liquid, then most likely the velocity in terms of the meter per second will be the same. Okay, so it only changes when the diameter of the pipeline changes. Okay, so that's the one way to put it. Okay, now the Z, delta elevation. Okay, so you just need to know the surface. So that's the Z1, and then that's your Z2. When you extend the line, that's the delta Z. Okay. Even if it's 1 atm to 1 atm, the same pressure, but Z2 is higher than Z1, then you need to pump to transfer to a higher ground. Okay, maybe let's imagine if the reservoir, I don't know if it's related to you. Okay, what's the... Okay, let's imagine that you have a water well in your home. Okay, you have a water well in your home to extract water from well. You make a hole out of 20 to 30 meter underground to get water from groundwater. Okay, so that's your home. Okay, that's your home. And then you make a wall. You make a well. Let's say 30 meter. The purpose is so that you can use the water to wash, to have in your bathroom, in your kitchen, to wash a car and so on. Yeah. Okay. So you dig a well up until 30 meter. Okay. Now you want to store it in your tank. Okay. Usually it's above ground tank or torrent. Okay. So you don't really play around with the pressure in this one. What's important is the pump is to transfer to higher ground, to delta elevation, right? You have plenty of water. Maybe in some of big city it's already depleted. Let's say you're still lucky to live in a place where you can get water underground. So when you dig up until 30-40 meter, you still get water. And then how can I transfer this water into my reservoir, into my tank that I can use in my toilet and so on? Okay, so that's why you install a pump. Okay, that's why you install a pump. You install a pump somewhere around here in your home, so it will be able to suck. It will be able to suck the water from the well and then send it above ground. Okay, let's say that I say to you that I drill a pump of 30 meter and then I have another, depending on your house. Okay, if it's one level, maybe it's only 5 meter, for example. But if it's like 2 stories home, maybe it's 10 meter. Just a quick comparison. Okay, let's say 5 to 10 meter. So now in total, the pump has to provide the delta elevation for, let's say, 40 meter. Okay, that's very common. So in this kind of calculation, it should be provided in the Z1 and in the Z2. Okay, Z1, let's say it's 0 and Z2 is plus 40. So that you know that it's impossible to transfer the water from underground to your tank without a pump because of the gravity and so on. So you need a pump to suck the water into the exactly the surface and then transfer it further to your tank above ground. Okay, so that's the purpose of the pump. It can be done. So again, it's just a way of you to interpret the situation. What is the purpose of the pump? And it could be a lot of different things. Okay. So once you know where to put this number, the energy equation should be straightforward. Make sure that all the units are already equal. Okay, that's another common mistake for student. Okay, it's plus equal plus minus plus. Make sure all these part have a same unit. Otherwise, it must be wrong. Okay, so yeah, that's a very important part. Make sure that everything is expressed in the same unit. Okay, over here I provide you if you want to express in joule per kilogram. It's doable. Okay, why? Because you have P1 as a Newton per square meter. That's your P1. That's divided by rho. That means rho is kilogram per meter cubic, right? So convert to SI, what would be the equivalent of this one? By the looks of it, it looks like a joule per kilogram. You have per kilogram somewhere over here. That's the per kilogram part. You have Newton meter, right? Newton meter. Newton meter is the joule part. So that's joule per kilogram. So if you want to be consistent with this form, make sure that your pump calculation is already in joule per kilogram instead of in watt. Okay, but if you look previously that looking at the pump curve, everything is expressed in meter in head. Okay, pump head. Previously, you get example, the head is between 60 to 150 meter, for example, it's already in meter, then make sure that everything is in meter. Okay, quick way to look at it, check the elevation. Okay, it's as simple as delta Z. Z is elevation, that must be meter. Okay, so but be careful that this part also has to be meter. Okay, so later when you want to convert from head into joule per kilogram, you just need to multiply by the gravity constant. And then you want to convert to joule per second, then you have to multiply by kilogram per second, mass flow rate. Okay, so don't be too distracted by a lot of equation. Okay, be simple in understanding the unit of the equation. Okay, I need to calculate everything in meter, so I have to use the head form. Make sure everything is in meter. Okay, now what I know is the joule per kilogram of the pump. Okay, that means now I need to use everything in joule per kilogram. Okay, so be careful. Okay, so it looks simple, or sometimes it looks something overwhelmed if you don't really understand the difference. But again, equation, that means the unit must be equal. Okay, so you should be able by now to understand where can you get the P1, where can you get the P2, where can you get the velocity, or even if the same pipeline diameter, then U1 can be disregard with the U2 because it's the same. Z1 and Z2, that should be available in your system design. Okay, EF, that must be calculated from a straight pipeline calculation. That's a calculation that must be calculated using the fanning factor and so on. Okay, so if you remember the EF, that would be, I can't remember the formula, but if I'm not mistaken, there must be some factor of small f itself, the fanning factor, usually L per D, usually what's the other, U square, V square, V or velocity. Okay, something look like this. Okay, so that's the fanning factor. So hopefully Pak Wawan already explained it to you. Okay, you know the system, you know the Reynolds density, you know the Reynolds number, you know the straight pipeline length, the diameter, the roughness, and so on and so on. So you can calculate the EF, and then don't forget to put the EF into the generic energy equation. Okay, so in order this water to flow 100 or some kilometers, there must be some delta pressure drop. Okay, that drop or the friction is this one. That's the friction. Okay, so now it all comes together. Okay, now it all comes together to put it into one simple energy equation. Okay. Okay, so now starting from those energy equation, we can simplify, maybe not simplify, maybe put it in the correct order so that the pump calculation can be done consistently. Okay, so over here I already mentioned to you. Okay, so now I put the work pressure from the right side of the equation to the left side of the equation, and then everything from point 1 will be sent to the other way around, so that I get delta P. Okay, delta P is P2 minus P1 and so on. And so on. Okay, now everything is put in order, so I can actually calculate my pump work requirement. Okay, so I can calculate my pump work requirement. And we haven't talked about the efficiency. Okay, in this part I'm still talking about the ideal one. Okay, strictly speaking from the energy balance of the equation, so it's still the ideal energy of the pump required. Okay, the efficiency will come later. Okay, it's still the ideal or the reversible. Okay, so yeah, the top equation and the second equation have the same purpose to calculate the work of the pump. It's just expressed in different unit. Okay, the top one is still in joule per kilogram. The second one is already in meter. Okay, so that now I can calculate that the head of the pump itself is the work by the pump divided by the gravity. Okay, that's still straightforward. And what I actually need to know is the head generated by the pump, or called the HP, head generated by pump, which is consistent that provided by the pump curve. That should be the same number that you use in your pump curve. Okay. Delta head. Okay, maybe you can call it delta head. Delta head generated by pump. Not the total head coming out of the pump. Okay, so it should be consistent with your pump curve. Pump curve. So why? Because the head of the pump has to supply the friction. That's the friction. Okay, that's the friction. That's the delta elevation. That's the delta pressure, and that's delta velocity. Everything has to be compensated by the same pump. Okay, so now point 1, point 2 is the suction and discharge. Let me check. Okay, I'll change this 3 and 4 so that it's consistent with our picture. Okay, 1 is the upstream, 2 is the downstream, 3 is exactly the suction of the pump, 4 is exactly the discharge release point of the pump. That's the pump boundary. Okay. Because now we want to separate everything before the suction and everything after the discharge. Okay, so that's the purpose of this part of the calculation. Okay, later on we want to get into that the head of the pump generated. Okay, head of the pump generated will be the difference between the total discharge head minus the total suction head. The difference will be simply the head generated by the pump. Okay, so again, be aware with the boundary. Maybe that's the keyword. Be aware with the boundary. When you're talking about the delta head of your pump by your impeller previously in your pump curve, you're just comparing 0.3 and 0.4. Okay? You're just comparing strictly the entrance point of the pump to the exit point of the pump. But don't forget about what happens in between the source and the destination. Okay, you will have some friction. You will have some friction in your suction. That's the head of friction in your suction. Okay, that's not section. Okay, that should be suction. And then later, after it released from the pump, it still has to go along the pipeline before it reaches the destination. That's why it's this is the, don't forget to calculate the friction at the discharge point of the pump. So be consistent. Are you comparing Bernoulli of 0.1 to 0.2, or are you comparing the Bernoulli of 0.3 to 0.4 only for the pump itself? Make sure that it matches with the requirement in your question. Okay. But again, everything is in Bernoulli form. So you just have to be aware. Are you comparing downstream versus upstream, 1 versus 2, or comparing suction versus discharge of the pump? Okay. So that's what I explained over here, that previously we just state that the energy of the pump has to compensate all the friction between 0.1 and 2. Okay, so let me change that. So when I talk about HF, I talk about all the friction from the source all together up until the destination point. Okay, that's HF. Okay, that's HF along the pipeline. All of them has to be compensated in your pump. Okay, but later, especially for NPHH calculation, we have to separate. We have to separate the boundary. Okay, I already aware that I have a friction at the suction part of the pump and then at the discharge part of the pump. But actually, I need to be very specific. What will be lost at the suction part and what will be lost in the discharge part? That will affect the NPHH calculation. Okay, I need to prevent vapor entering my pump. Okay, so it affect the NPHH calculation. Okay, so sometimes we think too simply. Okay, we think too simple. Sometimes we think, okay, I already have water in my water tank, and then later I will still have a water at my destination. Okay, so what to worry about? Okay, what to worry about? I'm almost certain that even during this pump condition, it will be in. I already make sure that the source is already in water in liquid form. Okay, so I don't have to worry about NPHH. But that's not really the case. Sometimes we miscalculate, we misunderstand some part. Even though our tank is mixture already in liquid, sometimes what actually matters for the NPHH calculation is what happens in point 3. So that's the reference point for the NPHH calculation. Ref point for NPH and net positive suction head, NPSH. Okay, why? Because what you have to ensure is you don't have any vapor in point 3, not in point 1. Sometimes you're safe in point 1, but because of the friction at the suction part, it could change the phase of your liquid. Okay, initially I have a saturated liquid over here, for example, and then I have a pressure drop because of the friction along the way. When it enters the pump, this pressure drop could vaporize some of your liquid. Okay, that's why it's very important for us to separate the friction in the suction calculation and the friction calculated in the discharge part. Okay, so that's what's important about this slide. You have to separate what happens in the suction and what happens in the discharge. The reference point now is, so suction is between 1 to 3. Delta P between 1 to 3. And discharge is the delta P between 2 to 4. If we consistently use this reference point, okay, 1 to 3, that's the suction pressure drop. 4 to 2, that's the discharge pressure drop. Okay, so by doing this calculation, we can separate. Okay, we can separate the head at the suction point and the head at the discharge point. Okay, we can separate. So what's the elevation of your suction point of your pump? What is the elevation of the discharge point of your pump? What is the pressure at the suction point of your pump? What is the pressure at the discharge point of your pump? Okay, this is point 3 and point 4 in the previous schematic. Okay, so that's the formula. To later we can calculate the NPSH. Okay, this part I will explain in the next session on Tuesday. Okay, so I will skip this part first and this part as well. I will skip this one first. I just want to use this last 5 minutes of this course to briefly talk about NPSH, net positive suction head, okay, to prevent cavitation. Okay, when a pump is operating, there should not be any gas or vapor existence inside the pump. Otherwise, you will have a cavitation. Otherwise, it will just, the impeller keeps rotating, but there will be no flow coming out from your pump because the impeller will just rotates the wind, okay, the air inside of the pump. There will not be any liquid coming out from the pump. Okay, so it stops operation and it becomes very hot and it could damage your operation. So the principle over here is make sure that your P3 is, when P3 is exactly the same with PV, that's when vaporization starts to happen. Okay, so your P3 has to be lower than pressure at suction or source point. Okay, because which one is higher, P3 or PS? It's straightforward. You don't have any pump over here, so there is no pressure generated over here, but you have friction. You have friction from S to 3 or 1 to 3. Okay, so of course P3 will be less than PS. Okay, or P1 in the previous slide. Okay. But use the constraint here is the vapor pressure. What is my vapor pressure? And am I already working in the in the vaporization zone or is still completely in liquid? Okay, if the delta P drops too much, now I get condition where P3 is already lower than PV. Vapor forms at pump. Okay, and that causing a cavitation. That's why usually P3 is not exactly measured. P3 is not exactly provided in the equation. What is usually provided is the PS. Usually, previously I give you a number of 1 atm, for example, of open tank, that's 1 atm. Then you have to think how much the pressure will drop up until the P3 point. Okay, there will be pressure drop of the suction over here, so that the pressure keep decreasing up until P3. The point here is P3 will still has to be more than PV. Okay, so it's a demand that PV is still higher than PV to prevent cavitation. It's a must. Okay. So again, now you're working with another Bernoulli. Okay, but the Bernoulli here is comparing the suction point and the point 3. Okay, so Bernoulli is PS compared to P3, ZS compared to Z3, and then the EFS, the friction along the pipeline between the source and the entrance part of the pump. Okay, so using the simplification, now the important part here is to calculate what is P3. Okay, so the important part is to calculate what is P3. So the exact point where the liquid start to vaporize is when P3 the same with PV. And using the simplification, when you try to solve the equation, it will form the NPSH calculation. Okay, so now I have to make sure that I don't have any cavitation, I have to make sure P3 is bigger than PV. Okay, so this calculation will make sure that your P3 is still higher than PV. That tells you about the NPSH of your pump. If you can make sure that it is positive, then you should be able to avoid any cavitation in your pump. Okay, or in so the left part here is called NPSH available. That's called A, available. Okay, based on Bernoulli of source versus suction point. Okay, source versus suction point. Okay, and if your pump is very good, it's very ideal, you just need to make sure that the left part of the equation is bigger than 0. You should be able to avoid any competition. But in more realistic terms, the safer way is to make sure your NPSHA, which is what is written at the left part of the equation, is above the NPSH required. Okay, where can I get my NPSH required? Again, this is coming from the pump curve. Okay, remember the previous pump curve, the secondary y-axis. At those conditions, the number is 3 meters, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so at those previous example, you have to make sure that your NPSH available is at least 3 meters or more to make sure that you don't have any cavitation.
Bye-bye, guys. See you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.